All right. Hi, everyone. My slides are supposed to advance automatically, so if it doesn't change in 9 seconds, start waving your arms, okay? So in case you didn't catch that, my name is Anna Penner. I'm the coordinator of research and programming for the LGBTQ Youth Initiative at Planned Parenthood Toronto. Yes, that does all fit onto my business card, barely. Planned Parenthood Toronto is a community health center serving youth 29 and under with a focus on sexual and reproductive health. We meet people's healthcare needs through primary healthcare as well as a number of community programs. So today I'm talking about the experiences of LGBTQ2S youth. In case you didn't catch that acronym, that's lesbian, gay, bi, trans, and two-spirited youth. I am not a youth. I have not been youth for quite a while, but luckily I have the brilliant words of so many of our youth volunteers to draw on because our programs at Planned Parenthood Toronto really are centered on the needs and experiences of the clients we serve. In our work with queer and trans communities, we hear a lot about how sex education fails queer and trans youth. And it fails queer and trans youth not only in the fact that it doesn't include queer and trans youth or hasn't historically included queer and trans youth, but it fails queer and trans youth in all of the things that it doesn't talk about. So when sex education fails to talk about consent, to talk about all of the ways in which our bodies are different, to talk about our pain and our trauma and how we negotiate that with someone else's pain and trauma and resilience, then we're not only failing queer and trans youth, we're actually failing all youth in sex education. Responding to these failures of the sex education curriculum, we began in 2012 to create programming for LGBTQ2S youth around sexual health. The program Queering Sex Ed was created with a group of youth who worked together to create 7 print and video resources. And this group of amazing youth came together and they decided they were going to brainstorm a list of all of the things they needed to learn more about. I only have 10 minutes, so I'm not actually going to tell you the whole list of what they wanted to know more about, but some of what they were hoping to learn more about was consent, relationships, STIs, gender identity, safer sex, harm reduction, sex positivity, mental health, negotiating risk, substance use, ableism, disability, race, two-spirit communities, HIV, human rights, PAP testing, self-care, values, pleasure, attraction, communication, self-confidence, and identity. The list is long. One of the prompts for today's conversation with you all was about engaging in healthy relationships in today's culture, acknowledging the impact of online spaces and social media. I've already talked about the fact that I am not a youth, so I'm not dating myself when I tell you that I grew up in a space where internet was just coming into our homes. And I'm not going to make assumptions about your age and stage, but I can tell you that because I grew up in that transitional period between when we didn't have the internet and when we did, and then even further in the last 10 years between when social media began to play a really huge role in our lives, things have shifted. But we've often come into it as adults from a position of fear. We use words like online predators or cyberbullying, stranger danger, and we're terrified of what the internet holds for young people. And the internet absolutely can hold all sorts of danger, and social media and online dating sites can hold all sorts of danger, but they can also hold all sorts of promise and connection. So in 2016, we did a needs assessment at Planned Parenthood Toronto of the programming needs and experiences of LGBTQ youth. Overwhelmingly, when youth were asked where they went to connect with other youth, what they said was online. And that included both social media and a range of online spaces that I'm going to have to read because I don't actually know all of these social media platforms, but including Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Kik, Reddit, as well as dating and hookup websites and apps such as Tinder, Grindr, and OkCupid. In discussing the importance of online spaces, a number of youth acknowledged the barriers to accessing physical space, including being outed, living in rural areas, and physically inaccessible programs and services. These online spaces, again, can be absolutely amazing for queer and trans youth. They have access to a whole range of language and identities and relationship titles that they might not otherwise have had. While I had to wait till I went to university in a bigger city to learn the word queer, my nephew living in a Mennonite community in rural Manitoba was able to come out as a demisexual, asexual trans man who's also non-binary. And the fact that he was able to have that language at 17 because he had access to the internet and access to social media is amazing. But just because youth are getting a lot from social media doesn't mean they're getting everything from social media. We have to make sure that we are using social media and using online spaces efficiently. We need to get over our fear of hashtags as a sector and as adults in these spaces. But we also need to make sure that we're not using online spaces as our only solution. In that same needs assessment of LGBTQ youth said though they were accessing community most online, it was actually where they were least interested in accessing programs. They want to be able to go into spaces and find each other and see each other and meet and have these nuanced conversations about who they are in the room. Luckily, the programs at Planned Parenthood Toronto are filling some of that gap. The slides that are playing in the background were created as part of Filling in the Blanks, which is a continuation of our Queering Sex Ed program. The youth who created the affirmations deck explained, in creating resources around sexual health for youth in our communities, we thought carefully about things we wished we had access to when we were struggling with our identities, or when we were struggling with the erasure, normativity, and violence in our everyday world. When young people feel that we are seen and valued, that can have a powerful impact on how we feel about ourselves and our ability to create change in our lives and communities. So much of this work is about being seen and being heard, and that's why I'm so glad to be in a space where I get to learn from and hear from LGBTQ2S youth every day. Of course, some of those conversations have now steered towards Me Too. How could they not? In queer and trans and BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, which our youth are all coming from, these are stories that are coming up every day and are part of almost all of their lived experiences. But when they're talking about accountability and holding their communities accountable, they're very rarely talking about it in a punitive way. They're talking about it as people who have messed up and failed in consent, and who are hurt and who are hurting, and who want to make space for others to be in their communities too. So they're saying Me Too, but they're also saying, how can we all be in space together? Can we go into programs and find space that we have to share sometimes with people who have harmed us and harmed our communities? How can we be together and learn from each other and do better? Those conversations aren't easy. They're very nuanced and they're ongoing, and they're still loaded with a lot of hurt, and hurt that is absolutely justified and we need to make space for, but they are happening in brilliant and ongoing ways. So take a look again at what LGBTQ2S youth are saying in their own words. Not my words, I'm boring. I get paid to do this work. They're doing this work because it is their passion and it is their home and it is their way to a good, strong adulthood as well. They are saying, I have the right to say yes or no and maybe, and it's okay if I change my mind. You deserve safety and solidarity. My body is the sex and gender I say it is. Figuring out who you are is not a race to the finish line. I get to choose what family means to me. I am allowed to be complicated and appreciated in my complexity. You are not too much, you are exactly enough. I deserve allies in my life who work with me to ensure I feel safe and supported in all spaces. I am not a problem to be fixed. You are an expert on yourself. Existence is resistance. No one knows better than you who you are or what you need.